Welcome, everyone, to Bracket U, a college basketball bracket podcast. It's brought to you by Delphi Bracketology. Delphi Bracketology is in our 11th year of doing bracketology work. This is our second episode of the season. I'm your host, Brian Tontonsoni. Before we introduce our guest, I have special thanks to our Delphi administration for their support of our club and all that we're able to do in and out of school. Special thanks to Bob Thompson for the intro music and to Jared Morris, my partner at Back Home Network, for all his guidance in getting started with podcasting and being able to do this. And so tonight, joining me is our Director of Media Relations or Media Communications or Credentials, however we want to say it. The title means absolutely nothing other than a big thanks. It is our math teacher, Steve Painter. Steve, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. It's been a while, but I'm glad to be back.
So Steve does a lot of work for us behind the scenes when he wants to go, I want to go, or students want to go to local college basketball games. Steve is the one who goes through all of the paperwork or the computer work or whatever to get us those media credentials. He is very, very much appreciated for the opportunities that we have as staff and as students to go to those games. And before we get into our bracket, Steve, would you like to just share your experience of how that has kind of evolved over the years and why that's such a big part of what we do here at Delphi Bracketology?
Sure. Yeah, it's amazing. Especially for the students that, especially Purdue has really been gracious in allowing us to sit in media row, be credentialed members, and then actually bring students to the game and give them experience of, especially sitting in a press conference and maybe occasionally asking a question of a player or a coach and doing a little writing. I can't think of any other, high school experience that's available. So it has been really, really cool. And it's really cool for us too as staff because we can see the games and get to participate in all of the media as well.
And I do think that it also helps us with getting eyes on as many teams as we possibly can, of knowing stuff beyond the numbers, which is what we're usually doing. So, Steve, let's get right to it. We had a really good meeting today where we just went and listed teams 1 through 68, and then we did a little bit of scrubbing and fine-tuning. I added a little bit there this afternoon, and it's what people want to know. And so our top seeds, and then I'll ask you about each line, your thoughts. Our number 1 seeds are Auburn, Duke, Iowa State, and Tennessee. And from my vantage point, Alabama and Florida were kind of putting pressure on there. Both got beat at home this week, so it kind of solidified. Your thoughts about any one or multiple of those teams on the 1 seed line?
Yeah, I think we've got it right. I feel pretty strong about the ones we have, and we've noticed over the years. Some people kind of bash the net, but the net is a pretty important metric. And you just look at the history, and usually those top 4 seeds, really the top 16, you have to have a certain net to earn your way in there. And right now, those nets are 1, 2, 5, and 4. They're right at the top. Whereas you got Alabama and Florida are 6 and an 8. But just overall, that I think we've got on the right spot. They'd have the most quad 1 wins, the fewest quad 1 losses. So I think they're pretty solid. But you just never know; things can change really quickly.
And so heading into our 2 seed line, we have Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, and Marquette. And really, I think Alabama and Florida are the ones, Steve, that are going to push for possibly the 1 seed. We also are aware that teams can come out from beyond that. Kentucky, Marquette, we have a really solid 3 line as well. Those teams get on a 4 or 5 game winning streak and can really change a resume. But right now it's kind of 6 teams for that number 1 seed line. And when we get to our 3 seeds, we have a real good discussion to come up here about the difference between the 2 and the 3 seed line. But your thoughts there on our 2 seed line, Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, and Marquette.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Alabama, Florida, that are kind of the top, are definitely our top of the 2 seeds. Just as far as net and strength of schedule is awesome for Alabama. They're a 3 on an 11, 3 overall, 11 non-conference. A little concerned about Florida. Their record is great. The teams they've beaten are great. But their non-conference strength of schedule is a 232, and that's just something to keep an eye on. And then the next one's down, Kentucky, Marquette. Marquette. I personally like Marquette a lot. They've got a great strength of schedule, really good wins. I think that's one to keep an eye on.
I'm a big fan of Marquette and Shaka Smart, but what I want to prevent is being too much of a fan and not being, objective. And so that leads us to our 3 seeds, Rich. Currently, as of today, Oregon, Kansas, Illinois, and Purdue got moved up in our group today to a 3 seed. They're on a real solid run of play with the 15 net, 3 and 4 in quad ones, and an excellent schedule. Just really boost I think when you start looking at the teams Purdue is in a bucket with, their strength of schedule really stands out and helps them as well as the quad one wins. But we have a discussion today between Marquette and Oregon. Oregon has a very impressive resume, and they're right on the 2 and the 3 cut line. So your thoughts about how we should go about looking at Marquette and Oregon for who gets the last 2 and who gets the first 3 seed line?
Yeah, we were discussing this earlier today, and the first thing that just jumped out at me was 8 quad one wins by Oregon, and it was like, oh, that's a no-brainer. They got to be above Marquette. But then you start looking at some more of their detail. They're 8 quad one wins, but a lot of them are in that quad 1B range. They only have 2 of the quad 1As. Marquette's actually got 3 of those. And then the net, we said the top seeds net counts, and Oregon's a 21 net. And we were looking at the history, and I don't think we'd ever seen somebody in that in the 20s of a net make a 2 seed. So that, to me, I think we've got Oregon's got the 21 net. So I think we've got it right. They're close. I mean.
It was really tight today when we talked about it. Oregon has some nice wins. Marquette, the same thing. They're both 9 and 2 when you combine quad 1 and 2, and then you got to dig a little bit deeper. There's some new stats that have been added for our listeners. There's some new stats, wins above bubble and so forth on the team sheet that as the season gets closer and we really have to make decisions, we're going to continue to dive into those types of statistics because when it's so tight, there might be one of those stats that really tilts the decision-making. But right now, Marquette on the 2 seed line, Oregon on the 3 seed line. Finishing out our protected seeds, 4 seeds, Ole Miss, Memphis, Michigan State, and Texas A&M. And, Steve, Memphis is the outlier here with the 37 net. And this is why the net is not an absolute criteria, because Memphis is 9 and 2 in quads 1 and 2, 5 quad 1 wins, 4 and 0 on the road, 5th toughest non-conference schedule. They've done a lot. They just had a few games that mixed up the mathematical formula. I think despite their high net, they are in for a 4 seed and maybe even higher than that. But those 4 teams, anyone else besides Memphis you want to talk about? That when we're looking at the different lines, I know we're going to be talking about Houston in a minute because that's a tricky one too. I could see a lot of justification for Houston, maybe surpassing one of those teams like a Texas A&M or a Michigan State. But right now I think we got it pretty decided. At the moment, it's going to change eventually, but Ole Miss, Memphis, Michigan State, Texas A&M on that 4 seed. You're listening to Bracket U from the Delphi Bracketology. Steve Painter is here, math teacher, and I'm Brian Tonsoni, founder of Delphi Bracketology, and we're talking about our positive discussion that we had today with our students, some 25 strong. We went around the room and talked about strengths and weaknesses and put our heads together in our second week of meeting for bracketology. We'll have a new seed list and a new bracket out tomorrow. We do have some live listeners. We thank you for listening to us. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat, and we will try to answer them for you here live if you feel like doing that. We do this, one, we like it, but two, we also like to share information. Steve, you mentioned Houston. Houston has a three net. They are a traditionally strong program, but as of right now, they have 0 quad 1 wins, and I think the quad 1 and 2 is record 5-3, and boy, that really sticks out. Our students had a hard time, and I get it, because when you look at all the quad 1s, the 3s, the 4s, the 5s, the 8 of Oregon, and then you look at a 0 for Houston, they wonder why aren't they further down the seed list. Your thoughts when you have these? You have outliers either way. Memphis 37 should move up. Later on, Texas Tech, if we talk about Texas Tech, they're very difficult to seed. They haven't beaten anybody. Houston at least has 5 quad 2 wins. Your thoughts on how to effectively do this, and is it really too early to get too caught up in those numbers?
Looking at Houston, they are super strong in about every metric except for that quad 1 category. But when you look at it, they've only had 3 quad 1 opportunities. They've lost all 3, but you look at who they lost to: Auburn, Alabama, San Diego State, all on neutral courts. So, I mean, and they were close. All 3 of those were 5-point margins or less. So they've been close. I know close doesn't always count. Never counts. But I think if they just need more quad 1 opportunities, and I think that's going to start to move them up. So
their schedule's backloaded, I think.
Yeah,
I think they got some really big games coming up towards the back end in February. That'll help.
Yeah, because their strength of schedule, you would think, well, they probably have a bad strength of schedule. It's not bad. It's like 75. But yeah, right now they've had just those 3 opportunities, tough opportunities, and they just have come short every time. So I think you kind of have that gut feeling, and maybe it's because they go to Final Fours. I think it's a team that's probably going to move up and not down.
I agree with you on that statement, moving up as they get those wins to fill in. We've seen that. Arizona is moving up. They were lacking wins. North Carolina finally got a quad 1 win, and they're moving up. You will see that. And the metrics matter. And I know, Steve, you and I discussed this, and our other sponsor, Dave Gilbert, a lot of people kind of say, oh, don't pay attention to the net. It's just a sorting tool. But when we look at trends, it really does matter. It's a mathematical metric, and they use others, Ken Pom and Bart Torvik, and like I said, wins above bubble. Those mathematical formulas count when you start scrubbing the list from one team to the next. And you have 12 committee members. Someone could say, hey, this stat is better than this, and I'm going to vote for this team over this team. And that's where it gets tricky, because there can be multiple right answers in where a team goes, but it's who the majority of that committee. We do have a question, Steve, from our listeners, and we're going to answer it. Jack Swerdloff, I apologize if I mispronounced your name there, said, would love to hear your guys' thoughts on Wisconsin, both resume-wise and also the eye test. A ton of quad 1 opportunities coming up for the Badgers. Jack, that's an excellent question. We have Wisconsin right now as a 6 seed. We discussed them for a 5 seed. We have them at 22 overall, 2-3 in quad 1, 5-0 in quad 2. Really helps them. So 7-3 altogether. A good strength of schedule metrics. Nothing to drag them down. A 24 net. That's the raw numbers. When you look at the other metrics, everything is in the 20s or the teens. So you're going to see. They've played a good schedule. They've won some games, and their mathematical offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency, 28 in BPI, 22 in Ken Pom, 20 in Torvik, and 16 in wins above bubble. So that puts them in that, 15 through 24 range. That's the resume. Steve, they haven't played at Purdue yet, I don't think, have they?
They have not. It'll be coming up.
We didn't have a chance to get our eyes on them other than that. Your thoughts on their resume? I'll talk a little bit about what I've seen from their roster-wise.
Well, the good news is for Wisconsin fans, they're got lots of opportunities coming up. I mean, that's one of the advantages of playing in the Big Ten. One of the things that of the things that's probably hurting Wisconsin right now is only their road record, only one road win. And I know winning on the road in the Big Ten is probably the toughest conference to win on the road. But that's the opportunity. If they could pull out some road wins, that's going to really help them. And then lots and lots of quad 1, quad 2 opportunities coming up just every week, every time you're playing a conference game. So I think the opportunity is there right now. Like we said, they're solidly in. Now it's just a matter of what they're going to do, in this next month.
The only thing, Jack, you worry about your Badgers on is you don't want them to go on an extended losing streak, because as a 6 right now, that's a top 25 team easily. More likely to move up with the quad 1 opportunities. From a basketball standpoint, I just love the way they're playing more freely and more open and scoring more points, and I think that is conducive to winning basketball. You don't have to grind out some of those real close games. You can really put pressure on the opposing teams, and Tanji has been fantastic at getting to the line and getting free throws, and they play with the level of toughness up there that I think helps them win games. And the Kohl Center is just a bear of a home court advantage. I won't say it's like Mackey, because I think Mackey's probably, besides Duke, Mackey is probably number 2, and this comes from an Indiana guy in home court advantage. But I think your Badgers are good, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them make a push to move up, and they're solidly in the bracket as of right now. So thanks, Jack. We appreciate you watching. We appreciate you asking questions. And again, if anyone else has joined or wants to chime in. All right, teams that you're watching, it doesn't matter what seed, Steve, teams that you're watching either because you believe they're on the way up or maybe on the way down. Who do you have?
Well, I mean, not to be a homer, but Purdue, it's just hard to ignore. Obviously I'm a Purdue fan, but they've got 5 straight Big Ten wins, all in double-digit wins. And I was looking at some of the notes from that we get from Purdue and the media, and they have not done that. I think it was since like 1988. So they're really on a roll. And it's tough. I was a little concerned last night when they only had 22 points in the first half at Washington, but they pulled out another one. They had a double-digit win, had scored 47 in the second half. That's a team that, that's one I watch the most. But they are definitely on the rise.
So let me jump in here. I think I really think Braden Smith is just fantastic, and was very much under recruited by other schools that wish they had someone like Braden Smith. But the whole team is a bunch of tough guys that really play basketball the right way. They struggled last night, but then they found it and extended, I think, to 9 or double digits at some point to pull out the win on the road. Trey Kaufman-Renn, I was able to help him work out a couple times. My son works for a basketball trainer who works with Trey, and I was able to go watch for a couple times. Great people as well as basketball players. But Caleb Furst has been the difference. They insert him in the lineup, and the defense gets better, and they're starting to turn people over. And if Purdue can play defense and stop people, I think that's a recipe, Steve, that you'll be happy again, even after losing, the 8'4" monster guy that you had in the middle that was an All-American. And he's doing well for the Grizzlies too, which is really good to see. So team moving up for me to watch is Arizona. They were way out for a while and had lost some games, lost to Wisconsin earlier in the year and struggled. And, boy, they went on the road and won at Cincinnati, won at West Virginia, which may not sound to a lot of people like big wins, but those were quad 1 wins. And they have not lost since. And so they are moving up. And they had the metrics. They had those mathematical formulas to their advantage. Now they're getting the wins to add up, and they are a team to keep an eye on in that Big 12. Hard for me to say that. We have them all the way up as a 6th seed, and I think we had them out earlier in the year because they were barely over 500. A team that you're watching, you're like, whoa, they better get going, or they might be left out, or they're already out. Which team's moving down, in your opinion?
Indiana. Sorry, Brian, but I think you agree.
They've been down. You can't move further down.
Yeah, they're still sitting on the bubble. Their opportunity is there, but gosh, they just don't look good at all. That loss, that blowout loss to Illinois at home the other night. I know you witnessed it firsthand. Just when you got the whole student body chanting "Fire Woodson," they are a team that is on the decline. They can turn it around. They're one of the most talented teams in the Big Ten, but they just have to do something with that talent.
Yeah, I would say individually very talented. Collectively, I don't know that they mesh, and that comes from me doing post game shows and all of that stuff. Their best win is Penn State, which is not even a top 50 win. They got a lot of work to do, but we've mentioned this a couple times, and Steve, I think this is a good point to kind of go to that. There are tons of opportunities for schools in the Big Ten. So if your team is out and they go on a 4 or 5 game winning streak, they're going to find themselves battling for a position and even moving up a couple seeds. The SEC and the Big Ten, almost every game you tune in on your television is going to be a game that the winner is going to be benefit on the resume, and the loser only loses if they keep stacking losses. Like you go into Purdue and you lose to Purdue, that's not going to be a blemish on your resume. It's just a missed opportunity. And I think it's going to be I haven't talked to you about this. It's not on our run sheet, but I think it's going to be a little difficult for us, or at least different, to evaluate the number of Quad 1 wins this year because the conferences are so concentrated. You have 18 in one, and you have 16 in another, and they are all good. Like South Carolina is the worst team in SEC, and they're not bad. So you're going to get a lot of Quad 1 wins, and I wonder if that, when we get to the bubble, our bubble talk here in a little bit, if that's going to be a little more difficult, because last year I think you had to have 5 or 6 to be safely in or get in, and this year I wonder if it might be more. Your thoughts on the conference realignment affecting our jobs as bracketologists?
Yeah, it is something. We're going to get into our bubble, but when we're looking at our last four in and the first 4 out, we've got 3 Big Ten teams right at there together on the bubble, and so that's the one thing with the Big Ten. It's so easy; they just beat up on each other. But the opportunity is there every week, because they're playing each other. But yeah, it's tough. It's good to be in the Big Ten because you got probably the most opportunity in the country, but you also have the opportunity to really hurt yourself and get beat up. So.
Yeah, and it's the first time 3 teams are going to get left out of the Big Ten tournament, only the top 15. And so it'll be interesting to see the numbers of team. They're talking SEC around our, on social media, bracket social media, of maybe getting 12, 13 teams in the SEC. I think that'll flesh itself out, and they'll get back to about 10 or 11. I think the Big Ten will be 8, 9, 10 in that range, depending on who wins and if it's concentrated in a few teams. But that's going to be interesting. I need to go and give a team that's on the way down. I missed my Louisville Cardinals, not mine, but I really am impressed with what Coach Kelsey's doing down there with Louisville. They are a 7 seed out of nowhere for us, with 3 Quad 1 wins, 3 and 4, and 3 Quad 2. So they're sitting at 6 and 5, a plus, with 4 and 1, and great schedule strength. After Louisville had 2 horrible years, I didn't think a first-year coach could come in and maybe get them to the tournament. They still got to win. They're not a lock, but I think Louisville might be in. A team that's on the decline right now is UCLA, and our hearts go out to the people in Los Angeles. It's got to be tough even just being in that, even if you haven't been directly affected. I know Coach Cronin was they almost evacuated his house in Encino, and he was talking about that in the press conference today. I don't know how much of that. I think it obviously has to affect teams in different ways. But they haven't won in 2025. They beat Gonzaga before the new year, and then they've gone over. And Mick Cronin said today that they've had trouble adjusting to the physicality of the Big Ten. But that, Steve, was a team that might have been one of the Big Ten favorites, and they're really struggling now. We have them down. Our students thought more highly, and you may have also at the 9 seed, 8-9 seed. I kind of think that they're at a 10 seed at 11 and 6, but that's a lot further down than what they were in mid-December. Any thoughts on UCLA?
Yeah, I mean they're definitely declining, but they've got some positives for them. Their strength of schedules is good. They still have 3 quad 1 wins, and not too many 10 seeds have 3 quad 1 wins. So they got that going for them. But they just gotta start winning. They're only 1-3 on the road, so that's another thing that they probably need to improve on. They're 38 net, so that's respectable. So yeah, it's just time will tell. But right now they are definitely on the decline. But there's that opportunity. It's gonna be coming up to get right back up there.
And for our listeners who are live and the people who might tune in on the podcast, one of the things that we benefit from having Steve around and Dave, the other faculty member, and the veteran bracketologists, and even our freshman bracketologists, which we have 7 or 8 this year and have a really good recruiting class ourselves, is Steve bringing up UCLA's resume helped me because I think I got too down on them a little bit or dropped them maybe a little too far. They still have some wins, and they beat Gonzaga, and they beat Oregon at Oregon. Those don't get washed away, but sometimes when you see a team lose 3 or 4 in a row, you may drop them down. So after the show today, I'm going to go back in tonight while I'm watching the games here in the man cave, and I may really do a deep dive on UCLA. But that's how the committee works too, and I think that's where we benefit, and sometimes it helps us to adjust when you have a lot of different views or a lot of different eyes on there. And I think, Steve, you've kind of talked me into going back into UCLA and maybe moving them up a seed line or two. Let's talk Texas Tech. They're an outlier. They have really good numbers because they've blown out bad opponents and only have, I think, one. Their resume has gotten better this last week, but it's still pretty weak. How do we look at those kind of teams where the 19 net is kind of hard? The lowest team ever to be left out was last year at 29. And I know trends are trends until they're broken, but I can't envision 19 being left out. Yet, if we really were honest, Texas Tech would be out, wouldn't they?
That is a tough one. I personally would have them in. They're 3-3 collectively in quad 1, quad 2. They're undefeated on the road. The 19 net, like you said, I don't think 19 nets usually get left out. But the one glaring metric that is just like really stands out, they're a 313 on the non-conference strength of schedule. And like you said, they've blown out really bad teams. And, that's something that could come back to bite them because they definitely have played too weak of a schedule than they should have.
The other thing is they have 2 quad 1 wins, and they just got them in the last 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But it was at 70, which is right at the cutoff of 75.
Yeah,
and it was at BYU, who was a 40. It wasn't a quad 1A. And so when you dig in again to compare teams, they're quad 1. They count, but they're on the weaker side of that. And so when you just look at our spreadsheet and see the number, Texas Tech looks okay, but I really think, that their resume is a little bit weaker than the numbers at this time. But those teams give us fits where you have really good numbers and a weak resume, or really good wins, but you're at 45 or 50. Dayton is the opposite right now for us. Dayton has 2 really nice wins out in Maui, and then they go and they beat Marquette, our 2 seed. They have really good wins, and they've lost a lot of games, and they're in the 60s. Now, I think they're worse than Indiana in the net.
Yeah.
That's an outlier. That's an outlier in the other direction that people need to be aware of. And then everyone's always interested in who we have the last 4 in and the first 4 out. We'll go over that and then end with a last call question for Steve and I. On our bubble, our last 4 teams in have a heavy Big Ten flavor: Iowa, Texas, Arizona State, and Maryland. New Mexico is just above them. They're 6-2 in quad 1 and 2. That's what puts them in. So Iowa, Texas, Arizona State, and Maryland. We had a heated discussion between Texas and Arizona State. I kind of moved Texas in on my own after we're done because I think they're very similar to Arizona State. It was, I think, 7 votes to 6 votes, and then other people voted elsewhere to have Arizona State as the last team in, and then we rearranged it with scrubbing. Our teams out are Ohio State, Dayton, Cincinnati, and Central Florida is our first 4 teams out. we have another 9 or 10 on our consideration list, and really a lot of teams are still eligible if they make a run and move up. But Steve, as you look at that, any thoughts about the last 4 in and the first 4 out?
Yeah, it is so tough. I mean, the bubble is always the toughest decisions that we do as bracketologists. And I think you had mentioned it too. This may be the toughest year we're going to have because we feel like there's just a lot of teams that are really normally not their numbers don't represent a team that would normally get in. But some of these obviously you have to have 68 teams, and so they're just you're just splitting hairs on all these teams. There's an argument for each one in and each one out. What I look at it again is those 3 Big Ten teams we've got right there on the bubble: Iowa, Maryland, Ohio State, and it will probably sort itself out. But yeah, right now it's almost a coin flip.
And people often ask, and I still am totally unsure too. I don't think they'll put Iowa and Maryland against each other. I think they'll try to avoid it. I think when Rutgers and Indiana were in the first 4, they were right on top of each other on the seed line, but Rutgers goes and plays Notre Dame, and Indiana got scheduled with Wyoming because the bracketing principles. You really don't want to play a team that you've played in the first round. You aren't going to be scheduled to play against someone you played in the regular season, and there's some other rules as you go further on of when you can meet up with people inside of conferences and so forth that we may discuss on some show. For me, it's just tough. One win can move someone in, one loss can move someone out. It's really tight. And when things don't separate, then we have to guess what the committee is going to look at. Are they a pro strength of schedule? And that was are they pro conference? The one year Notre Dame got in, I don't think we had them in because they were 4th in the ACC but didn't have the overall resume. I think in that committee room they said, hey, the conference was weak, but they still were in the top 4. Let's vote them in. And so it gets to be a real guessing game with the last 4. And the thing that I think we've learned, Steve, and we probably need to remind our group of is I think when you get down to the last 6, 7, 8 seeds, you kind of throw out the formula that we have of looking at quad 1 and strength of schedule and all that, and you start looking at what would be why would you vote for this team versus why would you vote for this team? Because it really is votes in the committee, not placing people on a list 1 through 68. So it's really the last 4 teams voted in. What makes those popular and what kind of discussions? And I'm thinking we might even do that, when we pick our last 4, is have the team, you argue for this team, you argue for this team, and then we might take votes and see if that helps us try to identify those last 4 teams. So that's kind of a quick, half hour here of looking at our information. We do put out seed list and stuff on our webpage, but it's now time for our last call question. And I'll ask this of Steve. What criteria is the most important for you individually looking at a team? If you were in that committee room in New York City, what would be the thing that would help you decide who is a team to vote for or to move up? And which criteria do you think is overused or overrated?
Yeah, personally, the 3 that I look at probably the most, quad 1 wins. I really pay attention to the net just based on history, because if your net gets down in those 60s, no matter how good your other numbers are, you're not going to make it. So I like quad 1 wins net. And then I think one that gets overlooked is the road record. I remember the committee chairman last year was saying that, they look at, since you're playing on the road in the tournament, it's important. If you have a really lousy road record, that can hurt you. So those are the 3 that I like. The one that I think is actually overrated, you would think would be the most important, is just overall record. It is better to play a good quality opponent and lose than to not play them at all. And so, the overall record is, it's obviously, you got to win. Wins count. But I think it's maybe one that's overrated overall. And the same way with quad 1 losses. I think the committee looks at quad 1 wins, not so much your record in quad 1, because at least it means you're scheduling tough opponents. So if you lose to a really good quad one team, I don't think it really hurts you that bad. So that's
yeah. I'm with you. It's going to be. It has to be. You have to beat people. I really believe that, and that's the quad one. And then quad 1A would even be better. Get the really top-notch wins if you have to break a tie. And you do have to look at the net. I believe because that's the NCAA formula. They're not going to go away from it. They're not going to use KenPom over net. They're not going to use an average. I think sometimes people in bracketology and math love all the numbers and go, this is the average resume versus the average metric. But I don't know if I'm on a committee, I'm looking at those averages until it's a tie, Oregon, Marquette. Now we're going to look at maybe take the averages and those things. I don't think I look at the averages of all those metrics and then move a team up or down. Maybe it'll help in comparing one or two teams. But that's what I look. I love non-conference strength of schedule, and yet I get the argument that a lot of people throw my way is, well, if the overall strength of schedule is okay, why are you worried about the non-conference strength of schedule? Well, the reason is because I like programs that challenge themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that ends up playing well in wins and losses inside their conference. But I think it's played out very rarely. Do teams with 300 or worse non-conference strength of schedule get included on the bubble if they haven't beaten people to get in? So if I'm running a program, I'm scheduling people because I want to have the best chance to get in the tournament. And right now, like for me, Maryland is the team, I think, last team in. Why? They're 320th in the non-conference. They're 0-3 on the road, which I like your road, and they're 0-3 in quad one. The only thing that's keeping them in there is the net, and they might be an outlier, right? They play on the road against Northwestern here tonight as we're recording this on Thursday. To me, even though I do look at it, I think bad losses are overvalued sometimes, because if you have 4 or 5 wins and then you just have one clunker, the only thing that would be used for me is maybe up a line or down a line. I do look at it in general, but if I had to pick one, which I think all of this is important because it's like a big mixture of information and data, and you've got to combine it, and it all matters. But I think sometimes if a team loses, a game that they shouldn't, but they've had an excellent record. I'm trying to think, Illinois losing to USC at home. Yes, that's a blemish, but I don't think that drops them 2 or 3 seed lines because they lost to USC when they're proven they can go on the road and blow out Oregon. They blow out some other teams and they play well. That's what I mean by that. So, Steve, thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate all that you do for us. Any last thoughts before we call it a night?
Not really. Other than, to me, it's like, we're getting into the fun part of what we do. It's we look at everything in November, December, but it really doesn't. It's nothing to compare to what we're getting ready to do when you hit February. End of January, February, and so we're getting really close to the good part of what we do.
And the more data, the better. But there are trends. If you're in the top 6 right now, as long as you don't go on a long losing streak, you're going to be very close to that top 6. The teams have accumulated a lot of good data, but boy, when it gets February and things get solid, but we're over half of the way through. So it is a fun part of what we do and talking about it and sharing it. You're listening to Delphi Bracketology, Bracket U. If you have any questions, please get a hold of us. But that's going to do it for this episode. We'll be back next week. We're having difficulty. We have a lot of basketball players and wrestlers right now, and they have events and weather, and so it's hard to get them in. But Steve and I we'll have someone here to talk brackets every week. And then check out our webpage, DelphiBracketology.com. Follow us on Twitter at Delphi Brackets, where you can ask every night questions. We'll try to get back to you. We have an Instagram, too, at Delphi Bracketology. We don't use that a whole lot, but we'd like to update and keep you informed. We also have a donation page where if you want to help us with costs associated with our get-togethers and our technology, please do that. We have a couple of great Iowa fans who are donating per win for their Iowa Hawkeyes. And we appreciate that so much. So for Steve Painter, I'm Brian Tonsoni. Until next time, happy hoop watching.